All right, this was my favorite game of the weekend. Texas A&M outlasts Kentucky. I feel like we're talking like survivor language right now. Outwit, outplay, outlast. I think all three of those apply for the Aggies here, just barely surviving. Some Rob Dillingham theatrics late. It's hard to like come away from a game more impressed by the team that lost, but in a sick way. I think a lot of people are doing that with Kentucky right now.
Mhm.
We got Brian Rauf, Heat Check here with us. Brian, what's your takeaway from this game?
It was a game A&M had to have to avoid going 0-3 in the SEC. A loss would have put them 9-7 overall. Like they would have been in a pretty bad spot without the opportunity for a win the magnitude that beating Kentucky gives them on their resume. Right. So this was a must-win spot for them. Wade Taylor and Tyrese Radford were fantastic. Right. They combined for 59 points, damn near 60. When they play like that, A&M can play with the best teams in the country. And this is kind of the A&M team we thought we were going to get for most of the season and has not been the case. Now they both played about 40 minutes and were inefficient at times, Bradford, certainly from the foul line, but they carried the load. And I think if you're A&M, you have to feel good that your best players, your key players stepped up in that spot. But if you're Kentucky, kind of to your point, you have to like the way you fought back. And you were resilient, and your young guys made the plays for the most part they needed to make to force the game in overtime and come back and have a chance. The defense is still a concern because A&M had not been good offensively, and they went off for 91 against you, or excuse me, 89 against you in regulation. Defense has to improve, but I think that'll happen. We still haven't seen Kentucky really with its full complement of players yet this season. They've had some of their front court pieces in and out throughout the entire season. So the fact that we are getting what we've gotten from them, Trey Mitchell didn't really play well in this game either, I think gives me more confidence in what a full strength Kentucky team can be. We haven't seen it, but this is not a cause for alarm by any stretch.
Okay, I agree with everything you said. The shot making in this game was just so spectacular, both ways. Like Wade Taylor off the dribble threes in the biggest moments, just when you kept thinking Kentucky was finally like over the hump and going to steal the game. No, Wade Taylor was here to take it back away. Tyrese Radford was really able to get to the rim with some creative finishes. He kept getting to the free throw line. Like you said, he had some issues there, which was odd because he's not a horrible free throw shooter by any means, but started 0 for 5 in this game. Just kind of one of those crazy little games. It is interesting to me, like, I wish that A&M had more than that. And look, Henry Coleman can dominate a game just by rebounding. Now, in this game, he only had 2 defensive rebounds. He didn't even have an offensive rebound. But the tip outs that they do as a team, the way they aggressively crash the boards, wins them basketball games. And Coleman is often a big part of that. I wish they just had more scoring help because even in this game, like, I think Taylor played great. He was 1 for 11 from inside the arc. And look, his poor shooting has lost them games recently. So it scares me a little that they just don't have more options. Now, they didn't have more options last year either, and that didn't matter. They were 15-3 in the SEC, but just kind of one of those things where if they just had like a third guy who could like hit 5 threes any given night, and some nights he gives you 0, but 1 every 2 nights he'll give you 15, I'd feel way better about this team. Do you think this was like a turning point for A&M though, to the point where like they're back in the NCAA tournament picture and you expect good things going forward? Or was this just like a fluky sort of must-win game where they got the must-win and that's it?
I don't know if it puts them back in the tournament picture, but it puts them in position to, right? Like they had struggled this year, but had not really had a bad loss until this past weekend when they lost to LSU and then lost to Auburn. So you're 0-2 starting SEC play and things were teetering. But they have a good stretch coming up, like as good of a stretch as you're going to find in the SEC. Your 2 away games, at Arkansas, at LSU, home against Missouri, next 3 games. Those should be what you think about Ole Miss. They have a home game against Ole Miss after home against Florida, at Missouri. Like this is a 6-game stretch where in the preseason, we chalk that up as a pretty easy 6-0 for A&M. If they can go 5-1, maybe even 4-2, but if they can go 5-1 in this stretch, I think that changes the entire conversation around that picture, because I think then they would have the kind of wins and the number of wins to be in the conversation. But that doesn't, right? Like they needed that to put a stamp on their performance and their level of play that they could have gotten the wins and not had. But I think you're feeling much better going into the stretch coming off that one. It is the missing piece to the resume that they now have if they can add some of the supplementary pieces to it.
Yeah, 100%. From a Kentucky standpoint, want to ask you a couple things. I won't call them concerns, but just things that have caught my attention in the fallout from this game. Cal hit the podium and he said something that I found very interesting. He basically alluded to regret that down the stretch of the game, they kind of scrapped all their intention offensively. And it was a lot of just like, okay, do whatever you want. ISO ball, it worked, right? Like in regulation, that's essentially what got them back in the game. Dillingham's huge shots. Reed Shepherd had a huge one in transition as well. But overtime, it didn't work. They were sloppy, a couple big turnovers, a couple just early shot clock misses. I'm fearful of that comment for this reason. I'm not convinced that Cal historically has ran better stuff when trying to run stuff than what these guys would do, just letting them work and do their thing. Do you agree with me or not?
I don't. And I think his comment doesn't reference the necessarily like total freedom in the offense, but I don't have the raw stats in front of me, but it felt like every single shot they took was a contested jumper off the bounce in overtime. And I think they fell into that because Rob Dillingham hit 3 of those to force overtime down the stretch. Like that's the part where you have to give your young guys like Dillingham, like Reed Shepherd, like DJ Wagner, Antonio Reeves freedom, because they can do that and just take over a game without any coaching. You just roll the ball out and say, Rob, we need a big shot. And he came through time and time and time again down the stretch. We didn't get an overtime, and okay, it's not working. Okay, we clanked that. Okay, that was contested. Probably should have shuttled for that shot. And now you're halfway through and you haven't scored, and you've gone from tying the game with momentum to down multiple possessions without momentum. Like that's the time to kind of roll things back in and say, okay, we need to be more intentional with what we're doing. It's understanding. He talked about some of this after the Kansas game too, where Kentucky kind of struggled late and gave the game away, was identifying who to take shots and how to take shots late in those spots. Understanding that, like, okay, this isn't working. We need to reestablish our offense and try something different, work the ball back inside to go back out instead of wheeling and dealing and trying to take some of these contested shots that, yeah, we just made, but now we're out of rhythm and we need a bucket. So I took it from that standpoint. I don't think it's a cause for concern. I know Calipari has said a couple of things this year that has been like, why would you mess up what you're doing here? But that comment to me was more about like understanding the gravity of the moment and the momentum with which you are playing.
Okay. That's good context from you. And I think I agree with what you're saying. And you might have flipped my concern from medium to low now on this, but I don't want Cal to overthink this, I guess, is where I'm at.
Right.
Because I do think this roster has so many things that a coach could micromanage that, to Cal's credit, he has not micromanaged thus far. And it has worked for the most part. And there are a lot of moving parts. And at the end of the day, part of why I think this team looks like one of his best in a long time is because they're playing a different style than some of his recent teams are. They're shooting more threes than ever before because there are better shooters on this team than a lot of his teams have had. He's not trying to pound the post with a guy who's just not even really a low post scorer, right? Like it's working. And I'm just afraid he might over rein it in at a certain point. But at the same time, even if Cal wanted to, I'm not sure you could rein in Rob Dillingham, which is part of the fun of Rob Dillingham. The second thing I wanted to ask you about from a Kentucky perspective. So I've always had a theory that you can have too many good players on a team. And that sounds inherently wrong to say out loud because Some of Cal's best have been loaded with 12 deep NBA players. He's done the platoon system. He's figured it out. More often than not, you always want more talent, not less talent. With that said, I think it's better to have 5 great players on a team than it is to have 11. Because if you have 11, that means 3 guys are unhappy. That means you're not sure which guys are supposed to be in the game. If you have 5 great players, they're all healthy. They all complement each other. That's all you need. This Kentucky team is in a really unique spot because you can only have 5 of Trey Mitchell, Antonio Reeves, DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, Aaron Bradshaw, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham on the floor at once. And that's no disrespect to Big O, who I'm leaving out of this. But to me, Kentucky has 7 instant impact, huge talent type players that belong on the basketball court in the biggest moments of games. And Cal constantly is playing like Russian roulette with who's on the floor and who's not. And in regulation, you could say he pulled the right strings. He puts Rob Dillingham in. Rob Dillingham's 0 for 6 from the floor, I think, at that point. He goes 3 for 3 in 2 minutes, and he looks like a genius. But then in overtime, did he pull the wrong cards because he kept Dillingham in and he kept somebody else talented on the floor? Like, how concerning is it that Cal's going to have to pull the right strings every game in March in order for this team to get where they're going?
If there's somebody I would trust to do it, it would be Cal because of his experience in doing so. And the key when you have all of that, right, is balancing the egos. Calipari is an expert at that. I also see from Mitchell and Reeves in particular, the senior leadership on here, on this team, that they have bought into it. And they have bought into not necessarily playing their roles, because they play big roles, but understanding like the team aspect as opposed to their individual accomplishments, which was a question with Trey Mitchell earlier in his career too. And there seems to be that buy-in. The freshmen somewhat understand it. You know, I think like Reed Shepherd in particular is somebody who, with his production and efficiency to this point in the season, should be kind of throwing a fit, still be coming off the bench, and he hasn't. He just is relishing it. Dillingham the same way. Like those two have kind of relished in their, we're going to be the guys who read the spark off the bench kind of roles. And I think they understand that if it's one guy's night, that's great. If it's not some, then the next time it might going to be this guy's turn. I think there is some of that there. You obviously run the risk of having a fractured locker room or some selfishness come into play, because there are 7 guys here who could be the guy on any team. But the buy-in to believe in like a team goal seems to be there. And Cal is great at massaging that. He has not so much in recent years, but going back to earlier in the middle of his tenure at Kentucky, that was what he was the best at. And I think we're seeing kind of a vintage Calipari coaching job in that sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just, I don't know, man. There's guys on this team from that group of 7 where, like, when they're out of the game, I'm not, like, worried about when they're going to be back in the game. And then there's a couple that, like, I'm like, I can't believe this guy's out of the game. And I get you have to balance it. But, like, to me, the 2 that constantly are like, this guy should be on the floor is Shepherd and Dillingham. And those are the 2 that don't start. And often in crunch time, they are in the game. And often in crunch time, the ball is running through them. And you could even make an argument that the ball running through those guys is why they lost in overtime this game. So maybe this isn't the right time to make this argument. But I just think it's going to be crazy to watch, because, like, you're going to get to an NCAA tournament game where you're going to have one of Antonio Reeves or DJ Wagner or Reed Shepherd or Rob Dillingham probably off the floor, depending on who they're playing in the NCAA tournament. And it feels crazy that a player of that caliber might not be on the floor for this team, but that's how loaded that they are. All right, I'm going to end this with something a little shocking, and I want you to tell me, scale of 1 to 10, how shocked are you, or how much do you disagree with this?
Yep.
Kentucky is my new national championship pick, and I learned that in this loss to Texas A&M.
I think you could have made that realization a month ago and been fine. Like I don't think coming to that realization even now is a negative. Talked about it at the top. Like, they have not really had their full complement of players yet this season. And even when they lose, like, there are flaws. The defense is a concern that I want to see do better. But like this team has a long NCAA tournament run written all over it, partially because of that depth and the depth of scoring. If somebody has an off night, plenty of other options to pick it up. I don't mind that pick at all.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I'm at. It feels weird. Now I am notoriously all over the place with my picks. Last week I picked Illinois to win it all under the guise of Terrence Shannon's going to come back and they're going to look great because Damask got a lot better without him. I still kind of believe they're going to make a deep run this year. For the record, they looked horrible against Maryland. That's besides the point.
They could have used him against Maryland.
They could have used him against Maryland. I just I don't know. I don't know what it is. I've talked myself slowly into like Sweet 16 team to like maybe Final 14 to like nope. I don't care what the matchup is. I don't care what the draw is. I'm not picking against these guys. They're serial killers, Brian. Like Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepherd are trained assassins, and they're 18 or 19 years old, and they're stone cold murderers. And there's no way I'm picking against those dudes.
This team does feel special. I feel like they have like the added element to meet the moment, which you don't feel with every team.
Yeah, I don't know. I like Reed Shepherd was at the free throw line smiling, down two,
Right.
which was absurd. And that reminds me, we haven't even mentioned the officials. Let's just quickly on the officials. Regulation, should that have been a foul that sent Reed Shepherd to the line? Yes or no?
Not if you called the foul, the offensive foul in Radford on the other end. Right. The one where Radford got an offensive foul for kicking his leg out when he was just kind of doing his normal shooting motion.
Yeah.
You can't have both of those. You can't have both of those.
Yeah, I thought the sequence of the loose ball offensive rebound Shepherd at the end of regulation into Radford 3-pointer offensive foul into immediate Kentucky 3-pointer foul, which looked like there was no contact. I've never seen a sequence like that in 5 minutes this year. Look, in the end, Texas A&M won, so we shouldn't have gripes about it. But watching that play out in real time, I was baffled by those three. So, all right, fun game. BBN, I feel like I'm a part of you now. Texas A&M, congrats on a huge win. Hopefully that gets your team going the rest of the season. That's Brian Rauf from Heat Check CBB. I'm GregWaddell from Sleepers Media. Subscribe to the Sleepers channel so you can see all of our recaps this year. See ya.